The gunshot that split the evening air outside the Desert Rose Saloon in St. George, Utah was not what caught Thomas Colt's attention, but rather the woman who flinched at the sound while standing perfectly still otherwise, her spine rigid as iron despite the fear in her eyes. It was September 1878, and the territory was still wild enough that gunfire was as common as birdsong, but something about the way she stood there on the saloon's wooden porch, clutching a letter in her trembling hands, made Thomas pause mid-stride on his way to the livery stable. She was beautiful in that untouchable way that wealthy Eastern women often were, with dark auburn hair pinned up in an elaborate style that must have taken an hour to arrange, and a dove-gray traveling dress that probably cost more than Thomas made in 6 months of ranch work. But it was not her beauty that held his attention. It was the desperation he saw flicker across her face before she schooled her features back into careful composure. "Miss, are you all right?" Thomas asked, touching the brim of his hat as he approached. He was dusty from 2 weeks on the trail, driving cattle from his employer's ranch to the railhead, and he probably looked more like a drifter than a respectable cowhand, but his mother had raised him to be courteous regardless of circumstances. She looked at him with eyes the color of sage in summer, green with hints of gray, and for a moment he thought she might cry. Then she straightened her shoulders and gave him a smile that did not reach those remarkable eyes. "I am perfectly fine, thank you, just startled by the noise." Her accent marked her as someone from back east, probably New York or Boston, and Thomas wondered what had brought her to this red rock country where the desert met the mountains and civilization was still finding its footing. St. George was growing, with its Mormon settlers turning the arid land green through sheer determination and ingenious irrigation, but it was hardly the sort of place that attracted society women. "Thomas Colt, madam," he introduced himself, not quite ready to walk away despite her dismissal. Something was wrong, and his instincts, honed by years of reading weather patterns and predicting cattle behavior, told him this woman needed help even if she would not ask for it. "Rebecca Palmer," she replied after a moment's hesitation, and he noticed how her knuckles were white where she gripped that letter. "I am staying at the boarding house until my fiancé arrives next week." The word fiancé should have been enough to send Thomas on his way with a polite nod, but instead he found himself asking, "You came all this way alone to meet him?" Rebecca's laugh was bitter. Nothing like the sound he imagined usually came from that pretty mouth. "I came because my father arranged it before he died 6 months ago. Mr. William Blackstone owns several mining operations in the territory, and our marriage was meant to merge his mineral wealth with my father's railroad investments. Now that father is gone, I am simply honoring his wishes." There was something in the way she said it, a flatness that spoke of resignation rather than joy, that made Thomas's chest tighten with an unfamiliar anger. "That does not sound like a love match," he said carefully. "Love is a luxury for people who can afford it," Rebecca replied, and this time when she smiled it was sad and knowing. "I am quite practical, Mr. Colt. This marriage will secure my future and honor my father's legacy. That is enough." Before Thomas could respond, a well-dressed man emerged from the saloon, his face flushed with drink and his expensive suit slightly disheveled. "Miss Palmer, I did not expect to find you out here. The evening air can be quite harsh on delicate constitutions." Rebecca's expression shifted instantly to something pleasant and neutral, though Thomas noticed the way she stepped back slightly. "Mr. Blackstone's associate, Mr. Fletcher," she said by way of introduction. "Mr. Fletcher arrived yesterday to help prepare for the wedding." Fletcher gave Thomas a dismissive glance before turning his attention back to Rebecca. "You should return to the boarding house, Miss Palmer. It is not proper for a lady of your standing to be wandering about town, especially with the rough element that frequents these establishments." The rough element, Thomas thought dryly, noting how Fletcher swayed slightly on his feet. He touched his hat brim again. "Madam," he said to Rebecca, then nodded curtly to Fletcher before heading toward the livery stable, though something made him glance back over his shoulder. Rebecca was being escorted down the street by Fletcher, her posture perfect and her steps measured, and Thomas had the distinct impression of watching a prisoner walking to her own execution. He spent the next 3 days trying to put Rebecca Palmer out of his mind. He had work to do, final business to settle in town before heading back to the ranch, and no business whatsoever thinking about another man's intended bride. But St. George was not large enough to avoid someone for long, and he kept seeing her around town, always accompanied by either Fletcher or another of Blackstone's men, always wearing that same carefully composed expression. It was on the 4th day, when Thomas was loading supplies at the general store, that he overheard a conversation that changed everything. Fletcher was standing at the front counter, conducting some business with the store owner, and his voice carried clearly through the quiet space. "It will be a relief when this whole charade is over," Fletcher said with a laugh. "Blackstone has been courting the Palmer fortune for 2 years, ever since he learned the old man's railroad shares would pass to the daughter. 1 week of matrimonial bliss, a tragic accident with the girl, and all that lovely money becomes William's to invest in expanding the mining operations." Thomas froze behind a display of canned goods, his blood running cold. "That seems rather cold-blooded," the store owner said nervously. "That is business," Fletcher replied carelessly. "The girl is pretty enough, but she is essentially penniless except for those shares. Her father died owing more debts than anyone realized. The railroad stocks are the only thing of value, and they transfer to the husband upon marriage according to the father's will. Blackstone gets the shares. The girl has a convenient accident, and everyone's problems are solved." "Murder is not solving problems. It is creating them," the store owner said, his voice tight with disapproval. Fletcher laughed again, that same careless sound that made Thomas's hands curl into fists. "Only if you get caught, my friend. And accidents happen all the time in this territory. Snake bites, falls from horses, getting lost in the desert. So many ways for a delicate Eastern lady to meet an unfortunate end." Thomas stood there for a long moment after Fletcher left, his mind racing. He should go to the territorial marshal, report what he had heard, and let the law handle it. But Fletcher had been careful not to actually confess to a crime that had not yet happened, and William Blackstone was a powerful man with connections throughout the territory. Would anyone believe the word of a ranch hand over a mining magnate? More importantly, would they act quickly enough to save Rebecca? He left his supplies at the store and went directly to the boarding house where Rebecca was staying. The landlady, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Henderson, informed him that Miss Palmer was not receiving visitors, but Thomas planted himself in the small parlor and refused to leave until he could speak with her. Rebecca came down the stairs 20 minutes later, confusion and wariness warring in her expression. "Mr. Colt." "I do not understand. We barely know each other." "We need to talk privately," Thomas said, keeping his voice low. "It is a matter of life and death, Miss Palmer, and I am not being dramatic." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she led him out to the small garden behind the boarding house where they could speak without being overheard. The September afternoon was hot, the red rocks surrounding St. George radiating heat like coals in a fire, but Rebecca looked cold despite the temperature. "What is this about?" she asked. Thomas took a deep breath and told her everything he had overheard, watching her face grow pale and then paler still as the implication sank in. When he finished, she was gripping the garden fence so tightly he worried she might faint. "You are certain of what you heard," she whispered. "Every word," Thomas confirmed. "Miss Palmer, I know this must be terrifying, but you cannot marry William Blackstone. You need to leave St. George immediately." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, staring at the mountains in the distance. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I have nowhere to go. My father's estate is bankrupt except for the railroad shares, and those only transfer to me upon my marriage. Until then, they are held in trust by father's executors. I have been living on the charity of family friends for the past 6 months, and that charity has worn thin. This marriage was supposed to solve everything." "It will solve everything by getting you killed," Thomas said bluntly. "Miss Palmer, Rebecca, you cannot go through with this." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the moment when her careful composure cracked. "What choice do I have? I have no money, no family, no prospects. At least if I marry Blackstone, I will have a few days of security before." She could not finish the sentence. "You deserve better than that," Thomas said fiercely. "You deserve a real life, real happiness, real love." "Love," Rebecca repeated, and that bitter laugh was back. "I told you, Mr. Colt, love is a luxury I cannot afford." "Then afford it anyway," Thomas said. "Come with me." She stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "Come with you, I do not even know you, and go where exactly?" "I work on the Broken Arrow Ranch about 50 miles north of here. The owner, Marcus Crawford, is a good man. He would give you a job, a place to stay. You could work as a cook or help his wife with the house. It would not be fancy, but you would be safe, and you would have time to figure out your next step without a man planning to murder you for your inheritance." "You are asking me to run away with a stranger instead of marrying another stranger," Rebecca said slowly. "How is that any better?" "Because I am not planning to kill you," Thomas said simply. "And because you would have a choice. You could leave the ranch any time you wanted, make your own decisions about your future. Is that not worth something?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, and Thomas could see her thinking it through, weighing her limited options. "If I disappear, Blackstone will come looking for me. He will not simply let his fortune walk away." "Then we make sure he cannot find you," Thomas said. "We leave tonight, take the back trails instead of the main road. I know this country like I know my own name, Miss Palmer. I can get you to the ranch safely, and once you are there, we will figure out the rest." "Why are you doing this?" Rebecca asked, her eyes searching his face. "Why do you care what happens to me?" It was a fair question, and Thomas tried to find an answer that made sense. The truth was, he had asked himself the same thing a dozen times since overhearing Fletcher's conversation. He did not know this woman, had no obligation to her, and getting involved in her problems could bring trouble down on his own head. But he kept seeing the desperation in her eyes that first evening, the resignation in her voice when she talked about her arranged marriage, and something in him simply could not walk away. "Because it is the right thing to do," he finally said. "And because you looked like you needed someone on your side when I first saw you. Everyone needs someone on their side, Miss Palmer." Rebecca studied him for another moment, then nodded slowly. "If I do this, if I run away with you, I need you to understand that I have nothing to offer in return. No money, no connections, nothing that would make helping me worthwhile." "I am not asking for anything in return," Thomas said. "Just pack what you can carry easily and be ready to leave after dark. I will meet you at the back gate of the garden at midnight." She nodded again, her expression shifting from fear to something that might have been determination. "All right, Mr. Colt. I will trust you, though God help me if I am making another terrible mistake." "You are not," Thomas promised, hoping he was right. Midnight found Thomas waiting by the garden gate with 2 horses, his own sorrel gelding, and a sturdy bay mare he had purchased that afternoon with money he had been saving for a new saddle. Rebecca emerged from the darkness like a ghost, dressed now in a simple cotton dress and carrying only a small carpet-bag. "This is everything I have left," she said quietly, gesturing to the bag. "Some clothes, a few photographs, my mother's wedding ring." Thomas helped her mount the bay mare, noting that she sat the horse well despite her Eastern upbringing. "You know how to ride." "My father believed in a well-rounded education," Rebecca replied, "though I have not ridden in several months." "It will come back to you," Thomas assured her, swinging up onto his own horse. "We need to move quietly until we are well clear of town. Can you do that?" Rebecca nodded, and they set off into the darkness, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main streets. St. George was quiet at this hour, most people asleep in their beds, and they made it to the edge of town without incident. Once they were clear of the settlement, Thomas led them northwest, away from the main road and into the broken country where red sandstone cliffs rose like fortress walls and hidden canyons offered shelter to those who knew where to look. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to navigate by, and Thomas pushed the pace as much as he dared without exhausting the horses. They rode in silence for the first hour, Thomas constantly checking behind them for any signs of pursuit. When he was satisfied they had a good head start, he slowed the pace and glanced over at Rebecca. She was pale in the moonlight, her face set in grim determination, but she had not complained once about the pace or the rough terrain. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I am terrified," she admitted, "but I would rather be terrified and alive than dead in a week, so I suppose I will manage." "You are braver than you think," Thomas said. "Not many society women would have the courage to do what you are doing right now." Society women do not generally find themselves in situations where their intended husbands are planning to murder them for their inheritance, Rebecca replied with that bitter humor again. "Though I suppose I should have seen something like this coming. William's courtship was always more about my father than about me. He barely looked at me during our meetings, spent all his time discussing business with father." "When did you last see him?" "Blackstone, I mean. 6 months ago at my father's funeral. He expressed his condolences and reminded me that our engagement still stood. Then he returned west, and I have been communicating with him only through letters." She paused. "Letters that were mostly about finalizing the wedding arrangements and ensuring the railroad shares would transfer properly." "He never once wrote to you about anything personal?" Thomas asked, already knowing the answer. "Not once," Rebecca confirmed. "But I convinced myself that was just his way, that he was simply not a romantic man. I needed so badly to believe this marriage would work out, that my father had arranged something that would give me security. I did not want to see the truth." "You cannot blame yourself for wanting to believe in something," Thomas said gently. "That is just being human." They rode on through the night, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and sip from Thomas's canteen. As the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, Thomas guided them into a narrow canyon where a spring provided water and cottonwood trees offered shelter from the sun. "We will rest here for a few hours," he said, helping Rebecca dismount. "Let the horses recover and give ourselves a break. We have put good distance between us and St. George, but we still have a long way to go." Rebecca sank down onto a flat rock near the spring, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "How long until we reach the ranch?" "At the pace we need to keep to avoid Blackstone's men, probably 3 or 4 days," Thomas said. "I know it is not ideal, but I want to stick to the back trails where we are less likely to be seen." "I trust your judgment," Rebecca said, and the simple faith in those words made Thomas's chest tighten in that strange way it had when he first met her. He busied himself with caring for the horses, removing their saddles and letting them drink from the spring, while Rebecca washed her face and hands in the cold water. When he finally settled down near her with some dried beef and hardtack from his saddlebags, she was staring at the canyon walls with an expression he could not quite read. "What are you thinking?" he asked, offering her some of the simple food. "I am thinking that a week ago I was in New York, wearing silk dresses and attending tea parties with my father's business associates' wives. And now, I am sitting in a canyon in the Utah desert eating dried meat with a cowboy who might be saving my life," Rebecca said, accepting the food. "It feels like a dream, or possibly a nightmare. I have not decided which yet." "Both, maybe," Thomas suggested with a slight smile. "For what it is worth, I am sorry you were put in this position. You should not have to run for your life." "No, I should not," Rebecca agreed. "But I am grateful you were there to overhear Fletcher's conversation. If you had not been, I would be walking blind into my own death." She looked at him directly. "You saved my life, Mr. Colt, even before my life was in immediate danger. That is not a small thing." "Thomas," he said, "if we are going to be traveling together for days, you should probably call me Thomas." "Thomas," Rebecca repeated, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. "Then you must call me Rebecca. I think we are past the point of formal address." They rested through the hottest part of the day, taking turns keeping watch while the other slept fitfully in the shade of the cottonwoods. Thomas found himself watching Rebecca while she dozed, noticing details he had not had time to observe before. The way her hair had come loose from its pins during the night ride, falling in soft waves around her face. The delicate strength in her hands, not the pampered hands of a woman who had never worked but still graceful and fine. The way her brow furrowed even in sleep, as if she could not quite let go of her worries. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was a quality to her, a resilience beneath the refined exterior that drew him in ways he did not fully understand. He had known plenty of women in his 30 years, even courted a few, but none of them had ever made him feel this protective, this invested in their well-being after such a short acquaintance. When they set out again that evening, the conversation came more easily between them. Rebecca asked about his life, and Thomas found himself telling her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, losing his parents to illness when he was 20, and drifting west looking for work. He had been at the Broken Arrow for 5 years now, saved most of his wages, and harbored a quiet dream of owning his own land someday. "What would you do with your own ranch?" Rebecca asked, genuinely interested. "Run cattle, probably. Maybe breed horses, too." "I like working with horses, training them. They are honest creatures, horses. They do not lie or scheme or pretend to be something they are not." He glanced at her. "Present company excepted, of course. I was not trying to say people are inherently dishonest." Rebecca laughed, and it was the first time he had heard genuine amusement from her. The sound transformed her face, making her look younger and lighter. "I understood your meaning. Though I admit, after everything with William and Fletcher, I am feeling rather cynical about human nature at the moment." "Not everyone is like them," Thomas said. "Most people are just trying to get by, take care of their families, live decent lives. Blackstone and Fletcher are the exceptions, not the rule." "I hope you are right," Rebecca said softly. They traveled like that for 3 days, riding through the nights and resting during the day in whatever shelter they could find. Thomas taught Rebecca how to read the land the way he did, pointing out the signs that indicated water or good grazing or the presence of other travelers. She proved to be a quick student, observant and intelligent, and Thomas found himself looking forward to their conversations more than he probably should. On the third night, as they were making camp in a small grove of juniper trees, Rebecca suddenly asked, "Do you ever regret not having a family of your own? You are 30, you said. Most men your age are married with children." Thomas was quiet for a moment, poking at the small fire he had built. "I thought about it sometimes. But ranch work does not leave much time for courting, and the few women I might have been serious about did not want the kind of life I could offer. Hard work, uncertain income, living in rough country. Most women want more than that, and I do not blame them." "Not all women want the same things," Rebecca said. "Some of us would trade all the tea parties and silk dresses in the world for something real." "Is that how you feel?" Thomas asked, looking up at her. Rebecca was staring into the fire, her expression thoughtful. "I do not know any more. A week ago I would have said I wanted security and respect, a comfortable life befitting my father's daughter. But now, after everything that has happened, I think maybe I want something different. I want to make my own choices. I want to work for something and know it is mine because I earned it, not because it was given to me or because I married the right person." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Thomas said, and meant it. "That is called freedom, Rebecca. And it is worth more than all the security in the world if you do not have it." She smiled at him across the fire, and something passed between them in that moment, something warm and electric that made Thomas's heart beat faster. He looked away first, unsettled by the intensity of what he was feeling. This was not the plan. He was helping her escape danger, getting her somewhere safe where she could rebuild her life. He had no business developing feelings for her, no right to imagine anything beyond delivering her safely to the Broken Arrow Ranch. But his heart, it seemed, had not gotten that message. They reached the ranch on the afternoon of the fourth day, emerging from the broken country onto the rolling grasslands where the Broken Arrow ran cattle. Thomas felt the familiar comfort of home settle over him as the ranch buildings came into view, the sturdy log main house and the outbuildings arranged around a central yard. Marcus Crawford came out to meet them, a tall man in his 50s with a weather-beaten face and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. His wife Sarah followed a moment later, a handsome woman with kind eyes and capable hands. "Thomas," Marcus said in greeting, then looked at Rebecca with open curiosity. "I see you brought company." "It is a long story," Thomas said, dismounting and helping Rebecca down from her horse. "But the short version is this lady needed help getting away from a dangerous situation, and I told her you might have worked for her." Sarah stepped forward immediately, taking Rebecca's arm. "You look exhausted, dear. Come inside and we will get you fed and settled, then you can tell us all about it." Over dinner that evening, Thomas explained everything to Marcus and Sarah, from overhearing Fletcher's conversation to helping Rebecca escape St. George. Rebecca filled in details about her father's death, the arranged marriage, and her current financial situation. When they finished, Marcus was silent for a long moment, his expression grim. "William Blackstone is a dangerous man to cross. He has connections throughout the territory and a reputation for getting what he wants, regardless of the cost." "I know," Thomas said, "but I could not let him kill her." "Of course not," Sarah said firmly. "And Rebecca is welcome here for as long as she needs. I could use help around the house, and heaven knows there is always more work than hands to do it." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I cannot thank you enough. I promise I will work hard and earn my keep." "You are safe here," Marcus said. "That is what matters, though we will need to be watchful. If Blackstone sends men looking for you, they might eventually make their way here." "Then we will deal with that when and if it happens," Sarah said. "For now, let's get you properly settled, Rebecca. You look like you could sleep for a week." Over the following weeks, Rebecca integrated into life on the ranch with a determination that surprised everyone except Thomas. She worked alongside Sarah in the house, learning to cook for a crew of ranch hands, to manage the endless laundry and cleaning, to preserve vegetables from the garden for winter. But she also spent time outside, helping with the horses and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Thomas found himself drawn to her more and more as the days passed. He watched her transformation from a refined Eastern lady to someone who could saddle her own horse and rope a steer, her hands growing calloused from work and her face gaining color from the sun. But it was not the physical changes that captivated him. It was the way she laughed more freely now, the confidence that grew in her with each new skill she mastered, the quiet joy she seemed to find in the simple rhythms of ranch work. They fell into the habit of riding out together in the evenings, checking on the cattle in the far pastures, or simply enjoying the vastness of the landscape. It was during one of these rides, about 6 weeks after Rebecca's arrival, that she finally put into words what had been building between them. They had stopped on a ridge overlooking the ranch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and red over the distant mountains. Rebecca was sitting her horse with easy confidence now, no trace left of the frightened woman he had helped escape St. George. "I have been thinking," she said quietly, "about what I want from life now that I have the freedom to choose." Thomas's heart started beating faster, but he kept his voice casual. "What have you decided?" "I have decided that I want this," Rebecca said, gesturing to the landscape spread out before them. "Not necessarily this exact place, though I have grown to love it, but this kind of life. Working hard, being useful, living close to the land. And I have decided that I want to be with someone who values the same things, someone who sees me as a partner rather than a means to an end." She turned to look at him directly, and the expression in her eyes made Thomas forget to breathe. "I have decided that I want to be with you, Thomas Colt, if you feel the same way." Thomas had imagined this conversation 100 times over the past weeks, rehearsed what he might say, but now that the moment was here, all his practiced words fled. "Rebecca, I am a ranch hand with some savings and a dream. I cannot offer you the life you were raised for, the comfort and security. If we are together, it will be years of hard work before I can afford my own place, and even then it will be a modest spread. You deserve so much more than that." "I deserve real love," Rebecca said firmly, echoing the words he had spoken to her that day in St. George. "Everything else is negotiable. You taught me that when you risked so much to help a stranger escape danger. You showed me that there are people in this world who do right things simply because they are right, not because of what they can gain. That is the kind of man I want to build a life with, Thomas, if you will have me." Thomas dismounted and walked over to her horse, reaching up to help her down. When she was standing in front of him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gray in her green eyes, he finally let himself touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "I have been in love with you since the 2nd week," he admitted. "Maybe sooner. I kept telling myself I had no right to feel this way, that I was just supposed to help you get somewhere safe, and that would be the end of it. But I cannot stop thinking about you, Rebecca. Cannot stop imagining a future with you in it." "Then stop imagining and make it real," Rebecca whispered. And she was the one who closed the distance between them, kissing him with a sweet certainty that made his heart soar. They were married 3 months later in a simple ceremony at the small church in the nearest town, with Marcus and Sarah standing as witnesses and half the ranch hands in attendance. Rebecca wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped her make, and Thomas wore his best suit, brushed and pressed within an inch of its life. He had never been so nervous or so happy as when he stood at the altar watching Rebecca walk toward him, her eyes shining with love and certainty. Marcus had offered them the use of a small cabin on the far edge of the ranch property, a place where they could build their life together, while Thomas continued to work and save toward his dream of his own land. It was humble, just 3 rooms and a covered porch, but Rebecca transformed it into a home with the same determination she brought to everything else. The first year of their marriage was not easy. They both worked from dawn to dusk, Thomas with the cattle and horses, Rebecca helping Sarah and taking on extra work doing laundry and mending for the ranch hands to earn additional money. But they were happy in a way that transcended the physical hardships, finding joy in small moments. Morning coffee shared on their porch while watching the sunrise. Evenings spent planning their future ranch, drawing maps and discussing what breeds of cattle they would run. Nights wrapped in each other's arms, safe and loved. It was almost 18 months after Rebecca's escape from St. George when William Blackstone finally tracked her down. Thomas had started to hope they might escape his notice entirely, that the mining magnate had given up and moved on to easier prey. But he should have known better. Blackstone arrived at the Broken Arrow Ranch on a cold March morning, accompanied by Fletcher and 2 other men who looked like hired muscle. Thomas was working with a young horse in the corral when he saw them ride up, and his blood ran cold with recognition. He quickly tied off the horse and went to intercept them before they could reach the main house, positioning himself between the visitors and where he knew Rebecca was working in their cabin. Marcus emerged from the barn at the same moment, having also recognized the threat. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Marcus asked, his voice polite but cold. Blackstone was a tall man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, expensively dressed even for travel in rough country. "I am looking for someone," he said without preamble. "A young woman named Rebecca Palmer. I have reason to believe she might be here." "There is no one by that name on my ranch," Marcus said, which was technically true since Rebecca was now Rebecca Colt. Blackstone's eyes narrowed. "Do not play games with me, Mr. Crawford. I know she came through this area with one of your ranch hands, a man named Thomas Colt." "I do not appreciate threats on my property," Marcus said, his hand moving casually to rest on the revolver at his hip. "And I do not appreciate men who try to swindle young women out of their inheritance through false marriage and planned murder." The statement hung in the air like a gunshot. Blackstone's face flushed with anger, while Fletcher had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I do not know what lies you have been told," Blackstone said coldly, "but Rebecca Palmer is legally promised to me, and I intend to collect what is mine." "She is not a piece of property to be collected," Thomas said, stepping forward, "and she knows the truth about your plans." "Your man Fletcher was not as discreet as he thought when he was discussing your scheme in St. George." Blackstone's eyes fixed on Thomas with dangerous intensity. "You have cost me a great deal of money and time, Mr. Colt. That is not something I forgive easily." "I am not asking for forgiveness," Thomas replied steadily, despite the fear curling in his gut. "I am telling you to leave and not come back. Rebecca is married now to me, and she is under the protection of everyone on this ranch. You have no claim on her. Married." Blackstone repeated, and his voice was soft with rage. "She cannot marry without the consent of her father's executors. The will specifically states that until she marries me, she has no access to her inheritance." "Then I guess I have no access to my inheritance." Rebecca's voice rang out clearly, and Thomas turned to see her walking toward them from the cabin, her spine straight and her head high. "I would rather have nothing and be free than have everything and be dead, Mr. Blackstone." "Rebecca, go back inside," Thomas said urgently, but she ignored him, coming to stand at his side. "I am tired of hiding," she said. Tired of being afraid of this man and what he might do, so let me make this perfectly clear, William. I know you were planning to marry me for my railroad shares, and then arrange an accident to claim them entirely for yourself. I have told everyone I trust about your scheme, and if anything happens to me now, they will all know exactly who is responsible. You have lost whatever you thought you would gain from marrying me. It is time to accept that and move on. Blackstone stared at her for a long moment, and Thomas could see the calculations running behind those cold eyes. Finally, the mining magnate smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. You always were more intelligent than your father gave you credit for, Rebecca. A pity, really. We could have done great things together. You could have done great things using my death as a stepping stone, Rebecca corrected. That is not the same thing at all. Blackstone inclined his head slightly, a gesture that might have been acknowledgment or mockery. I suppose you have won this round. Keep your precious freedom and your cowboy husband. But know this, you have made an enemy today, and I am a patient man. If the opportunity ever arises to reclaim what should have been mine, I will take it. If you ever threaten my wife again, you will have more to worry about than your lost investment, Thomas said quietly, and something in his voice made Blackstone's smile falter slightly. The mining magnate gathered his reins and turned his horse. We will see, Mr. Colt. We will see. Then he and his men rode away, leaving a wake of tension behind them. Rebecca was trembling, Thomas realized, though she had shown no sign of fear while confronting Blackstone. He pulled her close, feeling her bury her face against his chest. You were incredibly brave, he murmured into her hair. And incredibly reckless. What if he had decided to shoot first and deal with the consequences later? Then I would have died standing up for myself instead of cowering in fear, Rebecca said, her voice muffled. I am done letting that man control my life, Thomas. Even the fear of him was a form of control, and I will not give him that power anymore. Marcus came over to them, his expression serious. He is not done with you two. Men like Blackstone do not accept defeat gracefully. I know, Thomas said, but maybe it is time to stop running. We have a life here now, people who care about us. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Sarah said, joining them. And we will all keep watch. That man wants to threaten our family. He will find out what it costs to make enemies in this territory. The weeks following Blackstone's visit were tense. Thomas and Rebecca went about their daily work, but there was always someone keeping watch, always an awareness of potential danger. The other ranch hands rallied around them, making it clear that an attack on Thomas and Rebecca would be met with unified resistance. But as the weeks turned into months with no sign of Blackstone or his men, the tension gradually eased. Spring turned into summer, and life on the ranch returned to its normal rhythms. It was during this time that Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening as they sat on their porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, and he responded by picking her up and spinning her around until she laughed breathlessly and begged him to stop. We are going to be parents, he kept saying, wonder in his voice. I am going to be a father. You are going to be the best father, Rebecca said, cupping his face in her hands, because you already know the most important thing, which is how to love someone unconditionally. Their son was born in February of 1880, a cold winter night when snow lay thick on the ground and the wind howled around the cabin. Sarah helped with the delivery, along with a midwife from the nearest town, and Thomas paced outside the bedroom door feeling more helpless than he ever had in his life. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, strong and lusty, he nearly wept with relief. Sarah emerged a few minutes later, smiling. You have a son, Thomas, and Rebecca is tired but fine. Come meet your boy. Thomas entered the bedroom to find Rebecca propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such love and pride that his chest felt too tight to contain his heart. "Meet Timothy," she said softly, pulling back the blanket so Thomas could see the baby's face. "Timothy Marcus Colt, if you approve of the name." Thomas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat as he looked at his son. Timothy had a dusting of dark hair and his eyes were squeezed shut against the lamplight, his tiny fists waving in the air. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Thank you," Thomas finally managed to say, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and putting his arm around Rebecca. "Thank you for giving me this, for taking a chance on a simple cowboy with nothing but dreams to offer. You offered me something much more valuable than wealth or security," Rebecca said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You offered me real love, and look what that love has created." Marcus was touched when they told him they had named the baby after him, and he gave Thomas a substantial bonus, insisting it was time for the young family to start seriously saving for their own place. "You have been a loyal worker and a good friend," Marcus said, "and that baby deserves to grow up on land his parents own, not as the son of a hired hand." With the bonus and their saved wages, Thomas and Rebecca began looking in earnest for land they could afford. They found it 6 months after Timothy's birth, 160 acres of rolling grassland with a creek running through it, about 20 miles east of the Broken Arrow. It was raw land, no buildings or improvements, but it had good grass and water, and the price was something they could actually manage with a mortgage from the local bank. They spent the next year preparing their land while still living and working at the Broken Arrow. Thomas and some of the ranch hands built a small house and barn, working weekends and any spare time they could find. Rebecca planned a garden and a chicken coop, designing their homestead with practical efficiency. They moved to their own ranch in the spring of 1881, loading their modest possessions onto a wagon and making the journey with Timothy, now a sturdy toddler who loved anything to do with horses. Marcus and Sarah came to visit regularly, bringing gifts and advice, and the other ranch hands helped with roundup and other big jobs that required more hands than just Thomas. The first few years were hard, harder than anything Thomas and Rebecca had faced before. They lived on almost nothing, plowing every penny back into building their herd and improving their property. Rebecca worked constantly, managing the house and garden while also helping Thomas with the cattle when he needed an extra hand. She learned to brand calves, to doctor sick cattle, to ride fence lines checking for breaks. But they were happy, deliriously so, in a way that transcended the physical hardships. Thomas would often pause in his work to watch Rebecca teaching Timothy his letters on their front porch, or look up from mending harness to see her coming in from the garden with a basket of vegetables, and feel such a surge of gratitude that he could barely breathe. This was what he had dreamed of all those years ago when he was drifting from ranch to ranch looking for something he could not name. A home, a family, a purpose that went beyond just surviving. Rebecca had given him all of that and more. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in 1883, and their third, another son named Jacob, arrived in 1885. The house that had seemed spacious when they built it began to feel cramped, and Thomas started planning an addition. Through it all, they prospered slowly but steadily. The ranch grew from a few dozen head of cattle to over 200. They acquired more horses, including breeding stock that allowed Thomas to start the horse training operation he had always dreamed of. Rebecca started selling eggs and butter in town, then expanded to baked goods, finding that her Eastern education in planning elaborate parties translated surprisingly well to running a small food business. By 1887, nearly 10 years after their marriage, the ranch was firmly established and successful. They had paid off the mortgage on the land and were looking to acquire the adjacent parcel, expanding their holdings. Their children were healthy and happy, growing up with the kind of freedom and security that both Thomas and Rebecca had once only dreamed of. It was a warm June evening, and they were sitting on their porch after putting the children to bed, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Rebecca was leaning against Thomas, his arm around her shoulders, both of them tired from a long day of work but content in a way that went soul deep. "You ever think about how different your life would have been if I had not overheard Fletcher that day in St. George?" Thomas asked quietly. Rebecca was silent for a moment, then shook her head. "I try not to think about it too much. That life feels like it belonged to someone else, some frightened girl I barely recognize now." "You were never just a frightened girl," Thomas said. "You were always brave. From the very first moment I saw you, I just helped you find the circumstances where you could let that bravery show." "We helped each other," Rebecca corrected. "You gave me freedom, but I gave you something too. A family, a home, a reason to work for something beyond just yourself. We built this life together, Thomas. Everything we have is because we chose each other and kept choosing each other every day since." Thomas pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Rebecca Colt, more than I knew it was possible to love someone. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Rebecca said softly. "You saved my life in more ways than one that day you told me I deserved real love. And then you spent every day since proving it was true." They sat there as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had guided them on that desperate ride out of St. George nearly a decade ago. But they were different people now, shaped by the life they had chosen and the love they had built. Thomas had found the home he had been searching for, and Rebecca had found the freedom she had been craving. Their children slept safely in their beds. Their cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures, and their future stretched out before them full of possibility and promise. It was not the life either of them had imagined for themselves, but it was better than anything they could have planned, because it was theirs, earned through hard work and dedication, and a love that had proven stronger than any obstacle placed in their path. And as they sat there together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the life they had built, both Thomas and Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find: real love, real freedom, and a real life worth living. Together.